We made a lot of headway on the sawdust. It doesn't really look like it. Still a big pile in front of the door, but at least we can get around from that side. But anyway, I'd like to make an update on the conversion of our neighbor's lawn. That same day from the last video, video number 4, which I'll link to here, my friend Juan, or our friend Juan, came over and put in a ton of help, wonderful help, and we made some great headway. So let me share what we've got done there. It was a nice opportunity when he came over for us to start practicing what it looks like to cooperatively continue to farm and garden with friends, but practice social or physical distancing. So we had a bottle of alcohol and a towel that he wiped down a shovel with, and he wore gloves, and we kept about 10-15 feet apart. He dug and I planted, and it was a really nice, effective way to have the two of us focus on a lot of planting, and we got down this whole set in here. So the last video I talked about these elderberries and these black currants, so you can look at that video. I'll link it in the description if you want an update there. And so we focused on this whole area, which I'll explain in detail in a moment. A little more subtle, but looking down into the shadier wet area. So we had almost an inch of rain yesterday, and so you're really starting to very clearly now see where these areas are super wet and why we would want to plant right around them, so we can modify them in the future or just let them be ambiently wet quite a bit. But this area, so last video I talked about dividing a black currant, cutting it apart and planting it with roots. All of these, they're relatively small, but in such a wet, moist, wet and moist, it's that wet, it's moist and wet, but also fertile space, we can put in these cuttings with a little bit of mulch to flag them and show them, and they should take. So this is another variety of black currant, I forget which one, but in this case what we did is Juan went ahead of me about 5 or 6 planting holes and used a shovel to step into the ground, pry it forward to open up the soil, and then I followed up with a really nice sturdy, a little oversized of a cutting, but that slit made it possible to slide the cutting much deeper in than if I was just pushing it into the soil. And that's a strategy we used extensively when we were planting the other day. So we were able to get about maybe 30 cuttings in this row and another 30 in this row of another variety of black currant, all within about 25 minutes, 30 minutes, and that included the mulching. And I'll come back through with aluminum tags stapled onto locust to mark the different varieties so we can track them. But that was pretty quick to plant a little fruit medicine orchard. We didn't plant any shrub layer from that last currant to the driveway. In fact, this is left as it is. We'll let this start to establish a bit. Maybe we're mowing this season. Maybe we're talking with our neighbor about what would be a beautiful herbaceous boundary for the driveway. Would it be comfrey that we could then cut and send over? Maybe there's lovage and elecampane and marshmallow and larger herbaceous wet foot loving perennials that can be in here that we can harvest for food and medicine or use as mulch. But we're leaving this for now. We don't have to fill out every single thing. Like I said earlier on, we're focusing on the shrub and tree, the woodier layers first. It's like the scaffold or the skeleton of the layout, and then the details of the herbaceous companions and fill-in can be a second stroke without too much hassle. My phone's gonna run out of batteries in a little bit, so this will be a faster video. But this center row in here, so this is basically the center of the space between the driveway and the fence. So this will be the tallest element. In fact, let me again look at it from the south looking north. Pretty wet context, that's for sure. So you can see why we've chosen the characters we're working with. So again, I'm at the southern point of this whole block, looking north. The center here is now an offset, kind of a jagged row, double row of willows. There's about 15 different varieties in here. Some, like curly willow, are really dense, have high biomass, so they could be either used for mulch, or the hardwood could be used for, mediocre grade firewood in a future where we might need that. There's also basket weaving, both coarse and fine. There are varietals that make amazing huge catkins for the bees. So there's a lot of diversity in these willows, so disease pressure and browse should be reduced a bit. And some get huge, some get small, but again, with pruning, with the idea that my neighbor might want sheep, there's a huge amount of food to be harvested here. As they get too big, they can be harvested in service to the other elements that are here, which is, you can see the elder row. We stopped with the divisions back there from the last video and then continued on with the same spacing with hardwood cutting stakes. Again, all of this was the same treatment, where Juan was ahead of me quite a bit, so we had physical distance, opening up a slit in the ground to facilitate the cutting going in. And the way he did the slit was such that he stepped on the shovel at a 45-degree facing north, so the cutting slid in with a little bit of a bias to the north. So each cutting ideally aims a little to the north so that they fan out and thicken as they reach to the south. So when in doubt, keep things vertical, but if they need to bend one way or the other, if you're in a northern climate, aim your cuttings to the north so they can fan out and get a lot more branching very quickly. So we've got these willows added in. This will be a real keystone element here. This is just so wet. You can see the water standing in many places. So hopefully the willow just helps overall suck up a lot of water, humidify the air in the summer, provide insane amounts of beauty and browse and context. And this central tall spot, you can hear how much bird life there is here. It'll make a really diverse landing place for all the different birds to land and enjoy. And then the next row over, it looks like we just dumped some hay. But we went through, Juan made a slit every 8 inches to a foot, and I snuck 1 or 2 Jerusalem artichokes into each slit. Boom, boom, just a little bit. I didn't go very deep because otherwise they'd be swimming year round. We'll see how they do in here. We had some leftovers after shipping, but there's 4 or 6 different varieties all mixed in, again with the idea that some may do better than others in here. So when in doubt, go with diversity and density in both species and varietals, and it seems like you get way more ... resilience. Some say profit, but I'd say resilience matters a lot more. But anyway, all sunchokes through here, and again, we've left it from here to the driveway open. There's a lot more room. Maybe there's another row of sunchokes. Maybe there's another shrub layer. I could imagine raspberry or blackcap patches in here. So as they're walking down the driveway, they can pick fruit, and then some herbaceous boundary plants, but that can come a little bit later. We'll have to see. So the eastern side of this installation is relatively done-ish. We've got our few nut featured trees down at the bottom, some red buds, some raspberries, a whole bunch of black currants with some room to modify water channeling in the middle, room to think about a cane layer, perhaps an herbaceous moist loving layer 4 to 6 feet tall, some sort of boundary beauty layer. That can happen later. We've got a few random Asian pears that we can graft over to different varieties if they take. Not putting a ton of eggs in that basket, but they were leftovers, so we might as well try them. We've got a central vein of really high diversity, structural diversity willows for a whole ton of different applications. Sunchokes for caloric density in a perennial form that may be replicated or may transition over to some other unknown bounty over here. An elderberry row, some black currants, some room for maybe white and red currants, maybe some white and red currants. But you get the idea. There's a real distinct vagueness. You can say, well, you're supposed to be this permaculture guy. Where's your design, man? Well, that's part of it, is you consider your landscape and your implementation like a big, beautiful canvas. You don't put oil on the canvas right away. You start sketching. The idea is basically you charcoal sketch in the landscape. You put in some elements, you see how they do, and then you add around them. You build your structural elements and you fill it out with details later. That's okay, and it actually works really well. The other thing about that attitude with this, here we are at the road all the way up to the end there. There's, I don't know, over 100, maybe 150 different plants, mainly from cuttings. You can call that cheating as far as planting, but they'll turn into shrubs and trees, so they're legit. It's a lot of plant material without a lot of time, probably like 4 to 6 hours of labor in total to get it to here. If there's failure in this, or some die, or some were really inappropriately placed, okay, that's some loss of time, but the cuttings weren't that expensive or challenging to make. The most important part though is it's in the earth, it's starting to grow, and we can adapt and learn, either leave them, change our plans, or change the plant beings if need be. That's the main thrust of all of this, is don't overthink it, start planting, and from there you'll figure out what the details are later, and that's completely fine. Looking back at our landscape here, we've been evolving and shifting and adding and removing, just all sorts of cutting and digging for years and years now. No definitive design at the beginning. There was no drawing of what this would look like 6 years ago, 7 years ago. This front area is 5 years old, from a lawn in Forsythia to this state. So and there's lots of mistakes in here. I don't think I would have had this raspberry patch here. It's underneath an apple tree. It kind of suckers. It's a nuisance to work with. This black currant is getting huge and really like, why is that there? It could be somewhere else. There's all sorts of elements that we may have to dig up and move or just live with. But because we're just planting as we go, as fast as we can, we're learning as we go. And it really does work out. You get a lot out of these sorts of systems. That whole attitude of, hey, let's try this over here, let's put that over there. That's what you get after a bunch of years. So this is now coming into its 7th year of a backyard where we've mulched here, added gardens there, removed, changed, shifted, and slowly but surely kind of settled on a permanent pattern of layout and what's happening in here. And it's pretty functional, definitely some issues and questions, but overall it's a real pleasure to work in a space like this too. So yeah, food forests, plant them. Don't overthink it, have fun. Let us know if we can be helpful somehow. Thanks for watching.